Thank you for having me here today. Appreciate the invite. Very esteemed group of panelists, far more accomplished than myself. But for my part of this genocide convention, what I wanted to talk about was probably what I feel is the most forgotten genocide of Native Americans, because we're here today in the seat of power of one of the greatest nations on earth. Everybody knows that. But when you think of Native American genocide, perfect. Is that good? All right. So when you think of Native American genocide, what most people comes to mind are microbes or atrocities committed by the Spanish, in the 1500s. And that's all of that happened, yes. But what people don't realize is that the United States had quite a hand in it after they became a nation here. And every nation on earth, what do they have to be a nation? They have to have land and resources. And there's a reason why the United States is so powerful. They have land and resources. Well, how did they get it, right? This is a European-derived nation. Everybody that founded it, they were all European-derived. They took all of their concepts from the idea of Westphalian governance when they came over here. But what they really did was they stole and took things from Native Americans, and so everyone knows of Dr. King is a great civil rights leader, and he hit the nail on the head when he was talking about the foundation of this country and what it's founded on. He says, our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that the original American, the Indian. Now, I know that there's a lot of people here that are Hindu, and I guess we're somewhat Indian because Mr. Columbus was there to exploit y'all. That's where he was going first, right? Ended up here. So they still believe that we were an inferior race. And so Dr. King talks about how from the 16th century forward, blood flowed in battles of racial supremacy, and he accurately notes how the United States is perhaps the only nation on earth, other than Canada and Australia, which tried as a matter of national policy to wipe out its indigenous population. And he's right, he did make it to no crusade as well. And they've whitewashed it all from history, so that's what I'm here to talk about. And we want to move forward on this. As he mentioned earlier, my ancestor, Standing Bear, he was the first Native American to win civil rights, and I'll briefly tell you that story, but I want you to take note of these two photographs. The statue on the left is right over there in that building in the United States Capitol, in Statuary Hall, where each state gets to put two statues of somebody representing their state. And so Standing Bear is there for the state of Nebraska. Well, we preceded the state of Nebraska because the state of Nebraska only came to be because they executed a treaty signed by my ancestors with the Ponca Nation, in which we were forced to cede and relinquish the lands that are Nebraska in exchange for certain promises they claimed that they never kept, and we were forcibly removed. And this happened in the mid-1800s. But if you go to the post office today, there's a stamp of him on sale today, which is great because as we're talking about reconciliation, this is the start of that process, right? The statue just was put in 2020, and the stamp just came out this year. And so, let me go to this next one. So here's a map of all the nations. Native Americans are not defined by race. Native Americans are defined by sovereignty. And so as of today, there's what they call 574 federally recognized indigenous nations. And what that would be, just like any nation on earth, how India has relations with Great Britain, United States, so on and so forth. Well, each of these nations have relations with the United States of America, the government that still exists today. And prior thereto, they have relations with the French Republic, other colonial nations. But as you'll see in the middle of the map there, Ponca, Pawnee, and Kiowa, that's what I am, those were their lands. And so when the United States was founded in 1776 and forward, they had no diplomatic relationship with the United States. They had nothing to do with them. They had their own laws. They had their own way of life. They practiced their own religion. All of that free of any outside interference for the most part. But what they don't teach in United States history is, as this nation, it goes from where we are here now all the way to Hawaii, right? And so this process, no one considers it genocidal. They just consider it this progress and growth as the myth that's come out of it. And so as they moved westward, all of this land acquisition was through treaties and agreements with indigenous nations. And so a lot of you have probably heard of Andrew Jackson, the Indian Removal Act, and those all occurred in the southeast there. And so that was one of their, when they first started expanding, those were some of the first nations they encountered. And so the policy of the entire government, which I'll remind you, the myth is that Native Americans no longer exist, that all of this happened so long ago. Well, that's not true, because these nations, all of those are still here. And the nation that did it is sitting right there. It's still here. There's been continuity in government from the United States the whole way through in all of these treaties. And so this is all whitewashed out of history. And it's whitewashed in favor of all of these myths. And if you go down to the Capitol there later on today or whenever, I would encourage everybody to go to the rotunda. You know, underneath the dome there on the left, it has all of this beautiful artwork made in the 18th century around the same time they did this to my ancestors, which honors various genocidal things. And if you look very closely, you know, they glorify Tecumseh. He was a Native American leader. He was Shawnee. He had this idea to get all of the indigenous nations of the west of the United States together to resist or fight against further expansion. Well, one of the things they celebrate right there is violent murder, because they couldn't have that. You know, they needed their land. And so when you look before, everything else is all this other, all the Spaniards, all of this kind of racist stuff. And so one of the things on the walls of the rotunda, there's four, I don't know if they're called engravings or what exactly they're called, but the middle picture there is a picture of Daniel Boone just murdering 2 Native Americans. And so on the right is a newspaper article I found that was quite interesting to me. In the 1830s, when this was going on, they would bring indigenous leaders of these nations here to Washington to execute treaties. Technically, they were negotiated; they really weren't. But one of these is an American official who's recounting bringing one leader here. And, you know, the leader is a human being, which is often forgot about Native Americans, usually just, you know, this kind of a group of people that no longer exist. But, you know, this man was a human being there, and looking at it, and it obviously caused him great sorrow, and he picked up on it, that they're glorifying genocide. And this happened with my ancestors, too. So, my third great-grandfather was a man named Iron Whip, and they brought him here in 1858 to execute a treaty with the United States. Which he did over at the White House. There's a photograph of it, which is actually the first photograph taken of a Native American at the White House. But in that time, what they did was they entered into a treaty ceding part of their land to the United States that later became Nebraska. And the promises made at that time were they were going to reserve a portion of that land, which is called Indian Reservation. Reserve a portion of that land. The U.S. would, you know, provide them with free medical care. This is all in exchange for territory, which is quite valuable, right? That's farmland. That's helped build this country up. Medical care, education, so on and so forth. Well, what ended up happening was the U.S. Civil War happened, and thereafter they're moving westward quite rapidly. And so at that point, you know, that they had a problem because white people wanted the land that we had. And so what happened one day when Ulysses S. Grant, viewed as a national hero, by the way, he was president, they sent an agent out, and the agent showed up, and he said to my third great-grandfather, his name was White Eagle, who was the leader of the entire nation at the time, that you know, hey, you guys got to go to the Indian Territory. Sorry, that's why I'm from Oklahoma. That's why they put us there. I'm there. But when they told him that, my ancestor was like, I don't think so. You know, he's like, I've got a treaty, right? When he came up here before, and he held it up, and he's like, you know, it says right here, guaranteed forever, you're not going to do it. But they walked him down here on a death march. And so the Poncas were quite a small nation. It was only 900 or so people. This death march killed over 300 of them. That's a full third of a population. Now, obviously, when people think of genocide, you know, you're thinking on a larger scale, right? Like, you know, the Armenian genocide, the genocide of the Jewish people by the Nazis. But it's equally the same when the population's 900 and you kill off 33% of them, right? And so this happened. And when they marched them down there, my ancestor standing there, they killed off all of his kids on that. He had several sons at the time, but they all died on the death march. And one of them died when they first got to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. And when that last son died, he was a broken man. He was like, you know what, I'm going home. I'm out of here. I'm done. And so he goes off the reservation, so to speak, which was a federal crime at the time. And so the president orders the commanding general of the Army, William Tecumseh Sherman, also has a statue down here, a big American hero, orders him to apprehend my ancestor, which he does when my ancestor reaches Nebraska, where we're from. And so rather than go back, my ancestor went into the United States District Court for the District of Nebraska with a petition for writ of habeas corpus in his hand. And what that means is he's challenging, what are you holding me here on? I've committed no crime. I'm a human being. I'm a person. I've done nothing. And up to that time, Native Americans had no civil rights, no rights under anything to go into a U.S. courtroom as a plaintiff, only as a defendant, I suppose, getting charged with some crime. But amazingly, this man was successful in doing that, despite all the odds against him. He won that case, and then from that point forward, Native Americans were recognized as having at least a bare minimum of civil rights in the sense that, freedom of movement. But, these things happen, and very few people know about them. Because it has to be whitewashed out for U.S. history for this country to be so great. And part of the things they wipe out, again, I put a list here of all the war that I found. This is from a turn-of-the-century 1900 book. Well, in the curriculum today, what do they teach kids? They teach kids about the glorious, basically, the so-called revolution was really, what it really was a rebellion. They revolted against their king over taxes. It's not really, to me, justifiable, but whatever. And then after that, they'll teach about the Second War with Great Britain in 1812. Then they'll teach about the Mexican-American War. Then they'll teach about the Civil War. And that's generally where it stopped until World War I. But if you look closely at this list, it kind of reveals the genocidal nature of this country. Look at every little of those battles in between, all those wars, every single one of them. Deploying the army to go get, each tribe as they're moving westward. All of these nations are resisting because they had no civil rights, right? They couldn't go petition in court like my ancestor did. All they had was the right to a gun. They had a right to fight a war against them, and that's what they resulted to. It's the only choice they had. Put them all down. And so, as you'll see here again with General Grant, when he was president in 1868, again, viewed as a huge hero today for their Civil War. But he outright says it, and he says that he's confirming his views as coinciding with Mr. Sherman's, and that he says that the settlers, the white immigrants, must be protected, even if the extermination of every Indian tribe was necessary to secure such a result. And so, if you look at that photograph down there, that's what they did time and again in this country. Sent their military out, burning homes, killing civilians. Happened so many times. The worst massacres of Native Americans actually happened under U.S. rule around the time of this Civil War. There was a massacre called Sand Creek, killed several hundred people. There was a massacre called Bear River at the same time when Abraham Lincoln, great hero they claim, was president. Killed several hundred people. There's Wounded Knee, which I'm sure people have heard about, the Lakotas in 1890. And it just happened time and again. But why is it not known? Because they can't teach it, right? Because it undercuts, if children really knew why, what this country was built on, it undercuts the greatness of it, the inherent greatness of it. Because at the end of the day, I'm still standing here, right? They did it to my ancestors here, but I'm still here. And all these other people they did it to, all of those lists, Black Hawk War, all of that stuff, they've got descendants here today, still here. The government that did it, that perpetrated it, is still seated right there. What is today? Probably the 100-something U.S. Congress. Well, these were like the 30th U.S. Congress, the same government. But this ongoing injustice was all to secure the land and resources of all of these nations and exploit them. And so that's how this country became so great. But there's been absolutely no attempt at rectifying this ongoing injustice, period. Right? We're still here. And as it turned out, when they removed the Ponca as my ancestor, Sandy Bear, they removed us to Oklahoma, right? Well, little unbeknownst to them, they sat us down on top of an oil field. And so what happened was they, part of their policy thereafter was to allot no more communal ownership of land by these nations, right? And so they allotted out individual parcels. Well, my great-great-grandmother was this woman named Alberta Four Eyes. Turns out her parcel was on top of the biggest oil patch. And so about 100 years ago, she was actually the richest woman in Oklahoma. Well, what happened to all that, right? She was only getting, she had no real rights at the time, and so she was only getting, maybe a fraction, like 3% of these oil royalties, which the oil man that founded, his name's E.W. Marland, but he used the discovery of oil on her land. By 1920, 10 years later, he had already controlled 10% of the world's oil. And so he used that to build an empire. And so again, in Native Americans like that, we should be part of the richest people on earth, because we did control all of these valuable resources and things of that nature, which have just been outright stolen. I should be a millionaire today because my great-great-grandmother's money should still exist in this family as it does with white people. You go look at all these rich white people around here, that's generational wealth that they are stealing, and nobody cares about it because everyone's got bigger issues. And so what you see today, one thing that really struck me last year, President Biden, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, one of the first things he said, it really popped off to me, he's like, yeah, this is a genocide. I was like, what? Right? Not be that as it may. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. But one thing I do know is that the United States government has never recognized any atrocity like that against Native American nations as genocide, nor have they done anything ever to make any type of equitable, recompense for it. And so that to me is a real problem here. And so it's when we're talking about how to truly move forward with reconciliation of it, I don't know, because everyone in this country, I don't know if it's possible, I really don't, because the only true reconciliation is repatriation of this territory that was stolen. Well, that's going to prove to be impossible because once again, they're going to put the rights of everybody else over Native Americans. And so to me, that's why it's probably the most forgotten genocide, because there's never going to be anything done about it. They can't do it. They need all of these resources. And so it's just a testament to individual Native Americans like my ancestors here of what they were able to do and survive. And so I really appreciate you guys inviting me here today to at least breathe some life back into them for 25 minutes or however long I've been talking here, to let people know not only that they existed, but they actually played quite a large role in this kind of sordid story of the United States, and to remind everybody that they're just a handful of people. This country's existed for over 200 years, and they have done this to all of those nations on that list there. There's descendants everywhere, just the same as me, in the same position. Nothing's ever happened to them. And now today, what they're trying to do is basically erase indigenous identity. That's from a policy that arose after, where they forced Christianity on everybody, forced children to school, separated families. And so it's a real problem here that, it doesn't affect the larger. And so there's very few people that actually understand the scope. You folks do. But, what you have to do is get it in schools, and so children can understand it and know that that's the truth of what happened.